welcome at the Diplomatic Academy. Welcome for a very special event that we have been organizing for some time. We try to recharge relations which are already excellent, which may not seem necessary, but our idea is to discuss these 2 days why we feel they need to be recharged, and we have chances to do it. But let me welcome first our partners and our main speakers, and I'm very happy to have for the first time here in his function as Minister, Martin Polaschek, Federal Minister for Education, Research and Science. Welcome. I'm very happy to say already for the third time, the new US Ambassador, Victoria Reggie Kennedy, welcome to the Diplomatic Academy. And from my own home country, our present ambassador to the US, welcome Martin Weiss. I should also welcome the representatives of our partners, and it's a pleasure to have Eva Nowotny, Vice President of the Marshall Foundation, Austro-American. And Professor Beer, who is the head of the board of the Botstiber Institute. Welcome. Please, everybody else, feel specially welcomed by us here. As I said, I think it's necessary to discuss the recharging and how we do it. And my feeling is that this place is a very good place to do this, because the first director after the reopening of the Diplomatic Academy after the Second World War had a US passport. And he returned to Austria in a uniform, US uniform, to liberate Austria in 1945, Eduard Winter. And I understand when he opened here again in 1964, he had a double citizenship, US-Austrian citizenship. So from the very beginning, it's clear that we discussed these things. And I could give you a lot of examples of what we are doing, with how many universities we collaborate as a Diplomatic Academy, how many students we have from the US here. We have at the moment 10 students in our regular programs. We had more than 100 students in the last 10 years here. We have exchange programs with all parts of places. We work with the Marshall Fund. We work with the Fulbright. I see our Fulbright professor also here in the audience. Welcome, Jana. And so there is all sorts of relations. All our lectures we do here, we try to talk also about US foreign policy. We had lately Wes Mitchell here, who talked about the grand strategy of the Habsburgs, meaning actually more than the Habsburgs. Or we had Larry Wolff here, who works on, now he's also Austrian, but actually he's an American Jewish historian working on Galicia and the Jewish history of Habsburg Galicia. And he was given the Austrian citizenship in New York just about, I guess, 1 or 2 years ago. So I could go on and on. So this is not the case. It's not an issue really of is it the quantity we do in our collaboration, but the issue is, I think, why is it that we still feel, at least in Austria, a lot of our institutions feel we have to recharge these relations. We have to work on this. For those of you who were here last night, about 75 years of the Marshall Plan here in Austria, you got the feeling that things are working very well, that everybody remembers what the Americans did immediately after the war and how they stuck to it and how it helped Austria, and that it was not only about the financial support, that it was about the self-confidence to a different Europe after the Second World War. And still, I feel a lot of other academics have the feeling that we have a problem also in Austria in understanding this sort of relationship and making best use of it and sort of giving it more room. This may have to do with a few of dilemmas we have in our history. I'm myself a historian, so I always believe that history is made up of dilemmas. And sometimes we overcome them, sometimes we don't even realize them. And in the case of Austro-American relations, I think there is no better moment than today, because what happened just about a bit more than 100 days ago on the 24th of February showed us how today we need this partnership, how today democracy is challenged, how today things that we did not believe that would be possible can happen, and that the immediate response was, and that's what I like best, the immediate response was that the free and democratic world had a common, robust response, which continues until nowadays. And I think this is something that gives us the hope that there is a chance in this collaboration. We all know that when we discuss then how the US foreign policy makers or the Minister of Defense speaks about the objectives of the war in the Ukraine may sound different from what an Austrian member of parliament or an Austrian, even Austrian foreign minister thinks about what the objectives of this war were. But that we defend our idea of democracy, and that we see that there are people who want to defend also not only their own sovereignty but democracy, is something which surely combines us. And this is an obvious reason why talking about recharging in all fields our relations, I think, is very important. Well, we don't have a Marshall Plan moment here in Austria. We don't have it. We don't need it in Austria. And we heard yesterday other parts of the world are talking about it, and maybe there's a possibility. But the spirit of self-confidence that was provided with the help of the United States in 45, 46, 47, is something that we need in Europe again. That's very obvious. This sort of discussion, what is Europe, what is the basis of Europe, is very much part of that. But this is an introduction, and it's not just a celebration. So my task is also here as director to speak frankly about the dilemmas that are there and the issues that we should discuss. And one of the issues, and that is not new, is that many people have the feeling that maybe the EU and the US are drifting apart. Are drifting apart because the interests are different. And as we know, foreign policy is always either related more on interest or more related on values. The war reminds us of this. And for a long time, there was this feeling, maybe on both sides of the Atlantic, that it's all about interests, national interests that we have. And this has been actually, I think, has been increasing with things like Brexit, but also with the trade issues that we had from both sides of the Atlantic, with the tax discussions we had, with the discussions about the IT companies in the US and in Europe. Even when President Biden started, we were very happy to hear immediately diplomacy is back. A very good message from our point of view. But he also said, America first. I do know that an American president has to say America first. But saying something like this reminds us also that there are sometimes simply really different interests on specific issues. And on the European side, saying that we are looking for a sovereign Europe is a very positive thing. Many of us would say our EU Commission is speaking out for a sovereign Europe and we try to work together. But a sovereign Europe, again, means also a Europe which is a bit more separated from the transatlantic partnership than it used to be, maybe. So these are the issues, I think, when we talk about recharging, we have simply to keep in mind to understand what's going on. Between Austria and the US, as I see it, these long-term relations that we have are not only excellent now, but they are built on a long-term understanding. But I have only to make two remarks on these bilateral relations. And these are remarks for hopefully also for our discussion. One of them is there's a good and a bad thing in the fact that they are so strongly related on the Second World War and the outcome of the Second World War. It's very good that we have with Fulbright, with Marshall, that they can base on common ideas of democracy and how we want to work together. The bad thing is that they are so much related to the Second World War and the outcome of the Second World War. That happened 75 years ago. That's difficult to keep up in the younger generations. So maybe we should think about what are the new big ideas, how we can create this sort of bilateral interest that we have. I think we have time to discuss what's there. And the second point, as I see it from the American side, is many of these big combining ideas have been relating to a generation of Austrian Jewish emigrants from the time even before the Second World War. You know all the famous names who spoke out also and later on returned, fortunately, also partly to Austria. But this again, this is a generation of the Second World War, even before the Second World War. We need new role models as much as we can find them, and as many as we can find overall. And from the Austrian side, it's one of the problems is, and when we discussed our meeting just a few minutes ago, I said I have to mention things like which I do not like to mention really, that there is quite some anti-Americanism in the Austrian society. Has always been, always. It's, for a historian, a word you should never use, but it has been for a long time there. And it has not so much to do with Woodrow Wilson. Maybe a few historians still complain that Austria was divided after the First World War. But it has a lot to do simply with the Second World War and the fact that you had a lot of Austrians who felt we are not liberated but occupied. Some of them didn't dare to speak out about their real political convictions after the Second World War. Some of them, until maybe even the Waldheim discussions, thought that Austria is actually the first victim only of what happened around us in the 20th century. And certainly, my country, our country has changed, but you still have people who follow some of these lines. So we have to simply take that into account when we discuss about our bilateral relations. And I would also say that on the Austrian side, let's say from the the American side, there is still also one idea which I hear from neighboring countries also, looking into history. This idea that it was a Habsburg dungeon. Austria was a Habsburg dungeon of peoples that had to be liberated. Is still in the Czech Republic. It's used as an argument sometimes. What I'm saying here is only these sort of stereotypes, ideas which hinder us in our relations. We should be aware. We should work with simply. And from as far as America is concerned, as I already said, I'm not so happy to have the feeling that our anti-Americanism is partly from the left. It's sort of radical peace movement people which are not so strong here in Austria. Still they are. It's from equating the US with capitalism. So there is a left anti-Americanism. But there's also, as I said, quite a strong right-wing anti-Americanism, which sometimes even has to do with the idea there is this cultural superiority of us here in Europe, which is brought back to the history of Austria. In my opening remarks, I should be cheerful, but I think these 2 days are about reassessing, about stock-taking, about what we attempted in the last 75 years, and whether it needs a new effort, whether it needs new institution, whether we are doing enough. And I look at Minister Polaschek because I know there is no other ministry and minister who is doing more for these relations than your ministry, and has always been doing in education, in the research context, and that's very impressive. But you know what? I remember when I was a student at the University of Vienna, I bought some of those stickers which were sold in Austria because of an activity of Bruno Kreisky, 1976. He had the idea that we should make a campaign for supporting the research cooperation between Austria and America on the occasion of 200 years of the independence. And I still have in my head the sticker which I bought for my car as a student. And you know what happened then? This was the moment of the first Austrian center in Minneapolis, in the US, which was in Minneapolis, founded with the money created by this campaign of stickers and other things. But this is, how much? 50 years ago? There are no stickers now for the Austrian-American relations. So I would say this is actually a moment where we should do something to recharge this relation. We should look forward and discuss about a relationship based on values and interests. And I'm quite hopeful because, you know why I'm hopeful? For those of you who were here last night, Ivan Krastev was giving one of his famous keynotes. No preparation needed because he knows it all. But he is always very clear about how difficult the European situation is. And last night, he was closing his speech with some positive words about the moments that we are living in at the moment. That's a real chance for us, not only for the European cooperation, but for our bilateral relations, and finally the EU-US relations. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I was not too skeptical for the beginning. I hope I didn't speak for too long, but I felt, as the director of an institute which was refounded by a former American officer, which still is envious about losing its place in the Boltzmanngasse to the American embassy, because this building has been built purposely for the consular academy. It looks still like a consular Austrian academy, with the money of people which collected the money for this building, of the receipts from a book which the emperor had allowed to be made about all the parts of the Habsburg monarchy. But this is only an ironical remark. I envy you, but I like it because it's also a place of memory which combines America and Austria. And actually, you paid quite a fair price in 1947 for this building. Welcome. I'm looking forward to these 2 days.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen of all ranks and circumstances. Welcome also in the name of the Botstiber Foundation. To be more exact, in the name of the Botstiber Institute for Austrian-American Studies. We have similar concerns, similar aims as Ambassador Brix just talked about, and as of course the Marshall Plan Foundation has, that we heard about yesterday. We are about as old as the Marshall Plan Foundation, and we do pretty much the same things. But at the center, of course, is the relationship between the United States and America. Because of the foundation, The foundation was founded by an Austrian who became an American, who should be much more well known than he is. And I'm talking about Dietrich W. Botstiber, who was Viennese, born here in difficult times, stood in the monarchy. As a young man, felt that this country was too difficult for him to want to stay there. So his dream was, as a young man, to somehow get to America and do his studies of physics and his engineering in America, build a company, and do what he wanted to do. He talked about that in his memoirs that he wrote at the end of his life. He was the son, and I would like to mention that also, he was the son of somebody who is not, I think, so well known anymore, Hugo Botstiber. Hugo Botstiber was the first general manager of the Concerthaus and was very instrumental in having the Concerthaus built and run until the Nazis came, 1938, when he had to leave the country. He was also a strong father, and of course wanted Dietrich to be just as interested as he was in music. But Dietrich, as I said, was interested mainly in engineering. And so he actually managed to get to the United States in 1938, arrived there with no money, worked in cigar factories, and when his working life was over in 1985, he was a multi-millionaire who sold his company, which was a helicopter company, actually. I think it still exists. And then, shortly before the end of his life, decided that he would use the money for a foundation with different missions. But the mission that is, of course, important to us here is, as I said, the so-called Austrian mission. It is to promote, that's the way he phrased it, an understanding of the historic relationship between the United States and Austria, including the lands of the former Habsburg monarchy. He felt that Austria was not understood by Americans, maybe by American intelligentsia, but not by the average American, and the other way around. And I think he had a point. He put up the money, and we took it up and created in 2008 this Institute for Austrian-American Studies. We award, we do much the same, as I said, as the Marshall Plan Foundation. We award grants and fellowships, maybe not as large ones. We sponsor events like this, conferences, lectures. We have a yearly Botstiber lecture that took place just last week. We create digital programs. We publish a journal called the Journal of Austrian-American Studies. We have a blog series. We have a podcast series. We do everything that one needs to do to get attention. Over the last 15 or so years, we supported 150 grantees and fellows, and with them about 200 projects that all have to do in one way or the other with this bilateral relationship. We are administered from Media, Pennsylvania, and several representatives of that main office are here. I think Dietrich Botstiber would be very happy to see what we are doing today, and in that sense, I wish this conference every success. Thank you.
Dear Director Brix, dear Professor Beer, dear Ambassador Kennedy, dear Excellencies, distinguished participants, hearing Director Brix talking about the start of the Austrian-American relations, or the restart in the 1970s, it reminds me that this summit 15 years ago. It's 15 years that I was a guest professor at the Center for Austrian Studies in Minneapolis in a quite warm and humid summer. So you see, time goes by, but I really appreciated the work that has been done there, and all the institutes that have been founded. So it is really a great pleasure for me to be here today as Minister for Education, Science and Research and talk to you here concerning recharging Austro-American relations. Especially higher education, science and research need international cooperation and the mobility of students, researchers and academic staff in order to be excellent. The relations with North America and specifically the United States play an important role for Austria. On the one hand, the United States are a forerunner in science, technology and innovation, as well as a key partner to address the huge environmental and societal challenges ahead. On the other hand, in a geopolitical context, they are also a like-minded country. They share our values and principles in science and research. We have to work together to promote these values, like academic freedom, ethics and integrity in research, research excellence, and gender equality. Science diplomacy also plays an important role in this context. Therefore, we are glad to be the host country for the International Institute for Applied System Analysis. This institute was founded 50 years ago by the United States and the Soviet Union to use scientific cooperation in order to build bridges across the Cold War divide, as well as to confront growing global problems on an international scale. Sadly, at this moment, this role is of utmost relevance again. Historically, we have developed strong links to the US education and research system, especially with the Fulbright program. Over the last decades, also a number of new programs, such as the scholarships of the Marshall Plan Foundation and possibilities for cooperation at European level, example given via the EU framework programs of Erasmus+, have emerged for collaboration with North America. Within the EU framework program for research and innovation, Horizon 2020, Austria and the United States have collaborated in around 170 projects. As a further topic of joint interest, vocational education and training systems play a vital role in equipping young people with relevant skills for employability. Against this background, I have recently co-signed a joint bilateral memorandum of understanding with the Austrian Ministers for Labor and Digital and Economic Affairs with our respective US counterparts, focusing on fostering cooperation in the field of apprenticeships. To get a better understanding of the current science and technology cooperation activities between Austria and North America, including the United States, Canada, and Mexico, my ministry has recently commissioned a stock-taking of programs and instruments, and I'm glad to share some of those findings with you. First, there is substantial volume and intensity of cooperation. The study has identified 110 ongoing cooperation activities with a focus on mobility grants that cover all scientific fields and disciplines. The mobility schemes provide funding of around 7.5 million euros annually for the US cooperation alone. When it comes to individual mobility, there is an average of around 210 outgoings each year from the different programs, around 85 to 90% of whom go to the United States, around 8% to Canada, and 4% to Mexico. And there are around 150 incomings each year and a further 140 via the US teaching assistant programs administered by Fulbright Austria. Overall, 80% of the incoming mobilities are from the United States and 10% each from Canada and from Mexico. And around 60% of the incomings are going to Austrian universities and 30% to universities of applied sciences, while other types of organizations only play a minor role. Secondly, there's a strong focus on excellence. Harvard Medical School, Berkeley, Harvard University, MIT, and Stanford are the top 5 destinations in North America for outgoing mobilities of Austrian students and researchers, showing a strong excellence and US focus. Third, additionally, programs of Fulbright Austria and the Marshall Plan Foundation are the cornerstones of cooperation. The Republic of Austria and the United States of America concluded a bilateral agreement in 1950 that established the US Educational Commission here in Vienna. And the first Austrian-American exchanges under the Fulbright program took place in the academic year 1951 to 1952. And from then on, over 2,600 US citizens and 3,700 Austrian citizens now are alumni of this program. The Austrian Marshall Plan Foundation was created on the 50th anniversary of the European Recovery Program, which was initiated by US Secretary of State George Marshall in 1947. It aims at transferring knowledge between the United States and Austria and fostering transatlantic excellence. Together, the program of these two organizations account for around 2/3 of all activities for outgoing as well as incoming mobilities. Fourth, lastly, it was shown that there is a clear thematic focus on life sciences and medicine. The study also identified the main fields of scientific cooperation. Around 39,000 international co-publications between 2013 and 2020 by Austrian and North American co-authors were analyzed. Out of these, around 82% are with the United States, 16% with Canada, and only 2% with Mexico. For collaboration with the United States and Canada, the field of life sciences and medicine is clearly dominating. The cooperation with Mexico is more diverse and has a focus on physical sciences and in astronomy and astrophysics as well as mathematics. This was just an overview. For those of you who are more interested, I'm glad to let you know that the study is available online at the website of Ministry from this hour on. Finally, I wanted to mention the Austrian Research and Innovation Talk as our flagship event for linking the Austrian research community with North America. This year's event will take place on September 17th in Chicago with the general theme of strengthening trust in science and democracy. And I'm looking forward to discussing this really important topic with United States and Austrian participants, especially to talk about possible activities that fight fake news and conspiracy theories. So in the next 2 days, you will learn and hear something about the past, but you will also discuss what should come next. And in the presence of all of you, distinguished guests, demonstrate how important the US-Austrian relations are to our country, and we are all interested in improving this partnership. So thank you all for coming and have a good conference.
Ambassador Brix, Minister Polaschek, Ambassador Weiss, Ambassador Nowotny, Professor Beer, ladies and gentlemen. Ambassador Brix, thank you so much for the kind invitation to be here this morning to discuss the future of US-Austria relations. I realized that I always refer to it as US-Austria, and you refer to it as Austria-US, so please bear with me when I say US-Austria. But I listened very carefully to your opening comments, and I do look forward to a robust conversation about the negatives and the areas where there may be room for improvement. But I think it's really important to understand what works. And Minister Polaschek, thank you for your incredible discussion and saying how strongly and how great our educational partnerships work, because they're so important to the success of this relationship. I am very delighted to say that the relationship between the United States and Austria is strong, and it's getting stronger. The United States and Austria have shared values, common interests that connect us diplomatically, economically, commercially, culturally. Our countries work closely on a host of bilateral issues, as well as in multilateral organizations like the UN and the OSCE. And we join together in forceful condemnation of Putin's unjustified, unprovoked attack on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. This week, as you'll hear over and over again because it is so important, we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Marshall Plan, and we celebrate the critical role it played in the aftermath of World War II, both physically and economically, to rebuild Europe. But we also celebrate the success of the Marshall Plan in planting the seeds and nurturing the growth of democratic institutions and values in post-war Europe. Those institutions, those values are fundamental to the identity of modern-day Austria, and they are essential to the bond of our deep relationship. As we celebrate the remarkable success of the Marshall Plan, it's important to reflect on today's global situation and consider how best to nurture the Austro-American relationship in the next 75 years and beyond. As we address our relationship, we're mindful of how Russia's unjustified invasion of Ukraine threatens the economic stability and rules-based international order that we have built together over the last 75 years. I think it's fair to say that Putin's unprovoked attack and utter disregard for human rights and fundamental freedoms present the greatest threat to democratic principles and values the world has seen since World War II. In the face of such unspeakable violence and tragedy, the United States is proud to work alongside our allies and partners like Austria to impose severe costs on the government of the Russian Federation as it tries to tear at the fabric of democracy in Europe while threatening the very idea of a Europe whole, free, and at peace. In addition to enacting punishing sanctions against Putin and his regime, the United States has provided unprecedented humanitarian and military assistance to Ukraine. President Biden signed just 2 weeks ago a bipartisan bill that provides $40.1 billion in aid to Ukraine. Austria also has been strong and resolute in its commitment to the powerful sanctions imposed by the EU against the Putin government. And it has supported Ukraine with humanitarian aid, while at the same time opening its doors with a warm welcome for more than 70,000 Ukrainians forced to flee their country because of war. But as we consider the current state of the world, with a specific focus on the threat to democratic values evidenced by the war in Ukraine, it has become clearer than ever that the work to defend democracy is never ending. That complacency about the status quo is a luxury we cannot afford. We must work together to build the institutions that sustain the rule of law. As citizens of like-minded countries, we must work together to support those principles when they're under attack. The United States is committed to our relationship with Austria and to the work necessary to assure lasting peace, security, and prosperity. To that end, in 2019, we reaffirmed with Austria our mutual commitment to advancing our joint interests and common democratic future. Specifically, we agreed to enter a U.S.-Austria strategic dialogue that includes 5 key pillars. 1, the Western Balkans. 2, science, technology, and innovation. 3, trade and investment. 4, justice and home affairs. And 5, public and cultural diplomacy. This spring, Austria and the United States had high-level meetings to further the aims of the strategic dialogue, particularly in light of the current war in Ukraine. The United States and Austria, also in its capacity as a member state of the European Union for Austria, affirmed a mutual desire to deepen the transatlantic relationship and strengthen our shared commitment to advancing democracy and human rights. We condemned Russia's unjustified, unprovoked, and premeditated war against Ukraine and expressed a firm dedication to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. We jointly acknowledged the European aspirations of Ukraine, welcomed its European choice, and supported its political association and economic integration with the EU. And together, we expressed support for the objective of European integration of the Western Balkan countries, and we reaffirmed our joint commitment to establishing a civil society dialogue and fostering educational and people-to-people exchanges. I'm pleased to report that our countries have done more than just talk about our shared commitments. We've taken important, concrete steps to strengthen the transatlantic relationship into the future. For example, in September 2020, our countries signed a memorandum of understanding to create an exchange program between the U.S. Naval Academy and the Teresian Military Academy, similar to a program the Teresian Academy already had with West Point. This past April, as we heard from the minister, we signed another memorandum of understanding on sharing best practices on apprenticeship programs. And just last month, the Austrian military signed a partnership agreement with the State of Vermont National Guard to conduct exchanges in areas such as cyber defense, information operations, military mountaineering, and humanitarian and disaster assistance response. I believe that these outward manifestations of our mutual commitment to the transatlantic relationship are vitally important. Relationships are built brick by brick, year by year, person to person. And whether it's our condemnation of the war in Ukraine, or our work together to enhance stability in the Western Balkans, or our mutual commitment to addressing energy security and climate change, we, the United States and Austria, are strengthening democratic values and institutions. This conference is important. Without question, we further strengthen our common interest and shared values through dialogue and discussion. And a re-examination of the U.S.-Austrian relationship can provide fresh new perspectives that support our shared dedication to freedom and democracy. So I thank you, Ambassador Brix, Diplomatic Academy, the Botstiber Institute for hosting this important gathering, and I thank my colleagues on the panel and all of you in the audience for being here for this important discussion. I'm delighted to be here with you all. Thank you very much.
This is a little bit of a United Nations moment where everything has been said, but not everyone has said it yet. So thank you very much for the invitation, Emil. Thank you. It's great to be here. Mr. Polaschek, Ambassador Kennedy, Ambassador Nowotny, and Professor Beer. Great to share this panel with you. If anyone deserves credit to recharge the transatlantic relations, I think, as they would say in America, the Oscar goes to Vladimir Putin. Or as they would say, the shadow of the guillotine sharpens the mind. Who would have been able to bring Finland and Sweden into NATO? Who would have been able to bring a German red-green government to send lethal weapons into a hot war? I don't think that would have been possible without what happened on February 24. So when this is a contribution that comes a little bit from the darker side, I would also want to mention another man who has contributed strongly to this relationship, and it's President Joe Biden. You know, when the United States decided to share their Secret Service information in the lead up to what happened on February 24, that was not an easy thing to do, and I can imagine that there were a couple of discussions going on in Washington with some experts from the Secret Service who were not particularly happy that you would share this kind of information, because it always gives away some information about the sources that you've used to get this information. But it was felt in the White House it was important to show what was about to come, what was happening in the heart of Europe. And maybe the United States had to make up a little bit of ground. We remember the futile search for weapons of mass destruction. But this was a moment where America shared information with the world. And without that, I'm not sure that we would be where we are right now, because it showed so clearly what was about to come. And we would have seen, I'm 100% sure, arguments that would have said, well, you know, maybe the Ukrainians shouldn't have done this or shouldn't have done the other, or maybe, this, and there was some threat to Russia. It was made crystal clear that there was one man who was building for a war, who was preparing for a war, the war was coming, and there it was. And I think this is why we stand together so closely now in this fight. That is because of this decision by Joe Biden, which I think was crucial. Also look at the travel schedule of Joe Biden, the travel schedule that he has had up to now. Brussels, Italy, the UK, Switzerland, Brussels again, Poland, the UK, and only 1.5 years after he came into the presidency, South Korea and Japan. I think that is a clear indication of where the priorities of these administrations lie. We had a number of issues when he came into office. I remember our famous Airbus-Boeing dispute, a dispute where over the years we had $11.5 billion of sanctions, one against the other, while at the same time China is building the planes that we all want to build. Suspended under this presidency, and we will find a solution within the next 5 years. Steel and aluminum, same thing. Tariffs on both ends, tariffs that were hurting each other's economies. We found a solution for this. Not yet a perfect solution, but a good solution for the moment, again, under the leadership of President Biden. Even the famous or infamous pipeline, whichever way you want to look at it, Nord Stream 2, we had found an agreement and a way forward. This was a point of contention for many years, and there was a possibility to go ahead, were it not for one man. Digital and global tax, an issue that is a complicated issue between the United States and Europe. While we haven't found all the answers yet, we had a very good path forward. Again, we will find solutions in partnership for tricky questions, and that's exactly what you want to do in a partnership. So I think we have moved the needle quite a bit in transatlantic relations in the past years. And you may remember that not so long ago, it was in 2019, when the president of a European country talked about a brain-dead NATO. Well, not so brain-dead now. Emil, you mentioned the topic of America first. True enough. If I remember correctly, there was something like Österreich zuerst. And I think Mr. Salvini just came up with Prima l'Italia. In a way, they all have the same idea. Can't they come up with something better than that? But please, fair enough. But if you say, my country first, does that mean that your country alone? Is that the best way to achieve your goals? I think the answer is very clear. No. You achieve your goals together. And that is also the biggest difference that we have between other parts and regions in the world. And we have seen it. If you look at the vote in the United Nations, very shortly after the invasion of Ukraine, who would stand with Russia and who would stand against? Well, who were the countries who voted with Russia? Belarus, Syria, North Korea, and Eritrea. Well, that is quite an impressive alliance of partners. And that is the huge difference between us and other countries and other parts of the world. We are a thriving alliance. We stand by each other. Not that there are no problems, but we know how to solve our problems. And Vicky, you mentioned it, the values, the shared values. Oftentimes this sounds like a Sunday speech when you talk about shared values. It's like apple pie and motherhood and shared values. And everyone who's against, please raise your hand. But it is something that makes a difference. What happens to you when you're an opposition politician in Austria? Well, you can go to parliament, you can shout, scream, you can organize a demonstration. Just take a look what it means if you do that in Russia, if you're Mr. Navalny. Yeah? First you're poisoned and then you end up in a jail. That's what happens to an opposition politician if you don't have the same values that we have. Same is true for journalism. You can write all the stories that you like, that you want. It doesn't make our government always happy, but you are more than free to write your stories. In Russia and in many countries of this world, today you will fall off the highest building of your city if you do that long enough. So let me end on a quote by Ronald Reagan. When he once gave a speech, and he said, I talked to the president of the Soviet Union, and I said, the biggest difference between you and between us is that if you're an American citizen and you go into the street or you go into a bar and you will shout, "I hate the way Ronald Reagan runs the country," what will happen to him? Nothing. So the Russian president said, no, but this is exactly the same in my country. How do you mean that's the same in your country? Well, if you're a Soviet citizen and you go into the street or you go into a bar and you will shout, "I hate the way Ronald Reagan runs the country," nothing will happen to you. So shared values make a difference. They've made a big difference for many years. We are celebrating 75 years of the Marshall Plan. And I'm pretty sure that we will have many, many celebrations more to come, because values are not empty and values don't get old. Thank you for your attention.
Minister Polaschek, Ambassador Kennedy, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Beer, it's a very great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak also for the Marshall Foundation at this occasion. The hour is late and I will be very brief, because I will have the opportunity on Friday afternoon to express my thinking about this conference a little bit more fully. Nevertheless, a few things have to be said. The first thing is the Marshall Foundation is very proud to participate in this event, because it fits perfectly into our overall program. And the foundation was set up 25 years ago upon the initiative of the then Minister of the Economy and the then American ambassador. And the reason was that I remember the negotiations leading up to that moment very clearly, that the American ambassador, to her big surprise, has discovered that all the Marshall Fund money was still there. Yeah? And she decided to start an initiative with our Minister of the Economy to make good use of at least a part of that money for the purpose of strengthening Austrian-American relations. And the result of this is the Marshall Foundation that was set up with the purpose of strengthening this relationship, particularly in the field of academic exchanges, scholarships, professorships, conferences, a distribution of knowledge, a distribution of information. And that, in that respect, it fits perfectly into the basic ideas of George C. Marshall, creating cooperation by a better mutual understanding. Minister Polaschek has spoken about the many initiatives that are here, Austrian-wide, that are going on. I'm also chair of the board of the University of Vienna. We have a huge department of American studies that is extremely active, as do most of the other universities. We just had a recent, a couple of weeks ago, a major conference at the Academy of Science dealing with the transatlantic relationship. We have the Salzburg Global Seminar, which Ambassador Weiss is going to take over the directorship this summer. There are so many institutions that are devoted and pursuing American relations. We have hundreds and hundreds of Austrian scientists who are working at American universities, contributing to our transatlantic knowledge community. I would add one thought before I close. Very little has been said so far about the transatlantic economy. And the transatlantic economy that unites Europe and the United States, Austria being part of that, is so strong that they say it's the strongest economic relationship that exists anywhere in the world, and has made for it that you regard the transatlantic relation almost as one region, yeah? One economic region. And that's a very important aspect which should not be ignored, as well as the fact that 500 million Europeans, about 300 million Americans, we are a minority in the world, and many of the values that have been referred to are under attack. Democracy is under attack. Many values connected to human rights, freedom of information, citizens' rights, and so on are under attack. We just had a conference recently about the inroads that Russia and China are making in Africa, for instance, where Western ideas, Western values are rapidly losing ground. So in the framework of this conference, I think we should also pay a lot of attention to the things that we can do together, not only what defines our bilateral relationship, but looking at the whole issue a little bit broader and looking at what we can do in the world, what we have to do, and what tasks are there for us to confront together. Not only sort of a parochial look at our immediate interest in our relationship. I think that would be very important, and I think that's what I would hope as the possible outcome of this conference. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very interesting start of these 2 days.